Welcome to Art of the Zag. I'm Joe Lazer.
And I'm Shane Snow.
All right, and so I wanted to kick off this episode, and it's going to make a little bit more sense in a second, by sharing for the audience a piece of backstory lore of the two of us that is very random, but ultimately very relevant for this particular episode, which is that somehow Shane was a Mormon missionary in my hometown of Passaic, New Jersey. We never met each other. You never came to my house in like a really tight white Oxford shirt and one of those little black skinny ties holding the Book of Mormon. But like we might have crossed each other on the street, and that still like blows my mind to this day.
I suspect the reason I knocked on every door in that neighborhood that looked like it belonged to someone who speaks Spanish, which I don't know how we determined that, like kind of profiling.
Yeah, it's some ice shit right there by the Mormons back in 2003. It also, like, I literally grew up in an animal hospital, so you couldn't even see my door from the street. It was just like attached to the back. You know, I was just sleeping in some blankets in a cage, so it would have been hard to get to me.
We would have had a hard time adapting our missionary approach to that situation.
Just going to start barking at you.
But I was assigned to the Spanish language program, so we had like our competition were the English language missionaries, and we weren't allowed to teach their people. But no, when we discovered this, it was super random because I grew up Mormon, and when all my friends got assigned to missions in cool places like the Philippines and Brazil, I got northern New Jersey, and so I spent a winter tromping around Passaic, where Joe's from, and since then. I've actually had a complicated relationship with the idea of belief because after I was a missionary, I eventually left the church and decided to go my own path. I still have lots of friends and family who are part of it, but I decided to rethink what I believed, and so I have this. This is what's relevant to this episode, is after being deeply steeped in a certain worldview and religion and faith. I walked away from it. Nowadays, 20 years later, I get a bit of acid reflux when I hear people talk about the power of belief. Even though I respect people who do believe, I'm a bit allergic to walking into things sort of belief first. And I would say this is more of like a monologue for therapy than for our audience here. However, here's where it's relevant. Dear friend of Joe and mine named Nir Eyal is a human behavior researcher who is he's a fantastic guy, and he is one of my comrades in skepticism. He's a guy who I've been part of a author circle with. We've known each other for a long time. We write about human behavior and science as applied to business, and Nir is a skeptic. He looks at things and does not take them at face value. And so I was, dare I say, shocked when he announced that he is releasing a book called Beyond Belief, which is about the psychology and the science of believing. Not of knowing things scientifically for sure, but of believing. And I found this to be, it's sort of like a little bit of like the world is turned upside down if Nir is writing about this. But with my personal backstory, I was particularly fascinated, which of course, when something sort of shakes the snow globe of your world, a good way to deal with that is to lean in and to be curious and to find out more. So hence, this episode of this podcast, The Art of the Zag, is about the zag that Nir Eyal, the skeptical science researcher, made in creating this book that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and those of you who don't know, Nir, best-selling author of Hooked, Indistractable, sold millions of copies. He is, as Shane alluded to, a little bit of an outlier, I think, in the really pop narrative nonfiction world, in that he scrutinizes every study that he writes about to a degree that sometimes puts me to shame as an author, right? I've heard him talk about how for Indistractable, there are certain studies that he really wanted to use in the opening, but then he dug into it and he examined it more and more and decided he just couldn't use that one because he wasn't 100% sure of the science. And so for him to dig into this topic around belief, and we're going to touch on like a lot of live wire issues in this conversation you're about to hear. I encourage you to A, listen to it in full, and B, with an open mind, because we're going to get into why therapy might not work as much as we think, why the ailments that we're feeling, particularly my IBS, maybe be completely in my head, which I was like, oh, I need some more of these placebo pills when that part of the conversation came up. But I think we're also going to get into a mental framework that might change the way that you think about the story that you're telling in your relationships with other people, right? So much of the way that we end up with resentment or worry or anxiety about the people that we work with, that we're married to, that we're friends with our kids, is a result of these narratives that we construct in our head about other people's intentions. And then Nir kind of makes the argument that if we flip on its head the story that we're telling ourselves, do we lead to a much better result in our own lives, as well as some really practical tactics to get there. So I know this book, which is coming out the week that we're releasing this, March 10th, is going to blow up. So I'm glad for you guys to get to hear this conversation with Nir. Let's get to it. Nir Eyal, welcome to Art of the Zag.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So it is launch week, in our minds at least. We're recording this episode a little bit before, for your new book, Beyond Belief. Super excited to get into that there with you today. But before we do, I actually want to take a step back and look at your career as an author as a whole, right? Because I think your story and where you've been is really, really interesting and kind of embodies the idea of this show in a lot of ways, right? We're looking at counterintuitive approaches to solving problems in business and in life, but also like the idea of sort of zagging and pivoting in your own life. And so many authors out there, right? They have like one core idea that they develop, and then they tend to stick to that idea. And something that I find fascinating and admire about the way that your career has gone is that you wrote Hooked in 2014, which is about how to create a lot of the, sticky products in the way that the Silicon Valley giants were, so sharing those secrets with other people and building those sort of apps that bring us in, right? That draw us in. Mm-hmm. And then Indistractable in 2019 was sort of born out of this desire that you had when you're, playing with your daughter to not be so distracted by all of these apps. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with that type of zagging or what could seem like contradiction to folks on the outside, but you were really comfortable with it, right? And to explore that new angle. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit and kind of like what inspired that and what maybe the risks were there and what you gained from it.
Part of the reason I was so happy to come on the show is that I love the context. I love the idea behind the show. And of course, I love Joe and Shane. So that was number one. But I think a guiding principle in my life, or at least what's benefited me quite a bit in my life, is looking for that contrarian view, looking for that alternative perspective. And it's carried me through all my work professionally, although I didn't really think about it until you told me about this new podcast. And so with Hooked, for example, all my books, I write not because of what I know, I write because of what I want to know. So I'm always following my curiosity because I think there's nothing more boring than lecturing people on what you believe is true. Like that's really not that fun. What I think is very exciting is when I have a problem that I need to solve and I read other books on the topic and it doesn't get fixed, right? It's still, I don't find the solution. And so that's what happened with all three of my books. With Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, I had just sold a company and I had a very strong conviction that the companies of the future, this was back in 2012 or so, would require the ability to build consumer habits because I could see very quickly what was happening back then. This was just a few years after the the App Store, after the App Store came out in 2008. So this was 2012. And I could see that as we were going from desktops to laptops to mobile devices to wearable devices, the screen became smaller, and that meant that external triggers, the pings, the dings, the rings, the real estate to tell people what to do with your product was shrinking. And so that meant, therefore, that habits had to become more important. And so I looked for, hey, where's a book on how to build habit-forming products? I didn't find one. So I did a ton of research. I took lessons from the clients that I had worked with. And I basically, frankly, stole the secrets of Silicon Valley so that the rest of us could democratize these techniques and build habits for good. And that's what's happened. So Duolingo uses the hook model to help people learn a new language. Fitbod uses the hook model to get people hooked on exercise. All kinds of industries that I never imagined are using the hook model to build healthy habits. Then I wanted to shift my perspective, right? I zagged. I wanted to look at it from a different angle because I had a new problem. These devices were so good and they were so engaging that sometimes they would take us away from the most important things in life. And so for me, the moment that really was the pivotal moment when I decided I had to do some new research was when I found that I was distracted with my daughter. I was using my phone as opposed to being with someone I love very much. And so that's when I realized, wait a minute, what's going on here, right? Like these products are engaging, not the same products, by the way. Nobody's getting addicted to, an app that helps them save money or exercise more or eat better. That's not the problem. The problem is the other stuff, right? The companies I've never worked for, the ones I took these secrets from. It's the media companies that are basically monetizing our attention. So I wanted to figure out how do we use these products in a way that helps us rather than hurts us. And so that was the genesis for Indistractable. It seems like opposites. It's actually not opposites, right? Hooked is about how to build good habits. Indistractable is about how to break bad habits associated with distraction. So that was a shift in perspective. And to me, I didn't really think about it as like a strategic move. It was just interesting. It was just a problem I had. And all the conventional advice out there of technology is the problem. Stop using your phone. Stop checking Facebook. Wasn't helpful. It was a bunch of professors who had tenure telling us to stop using these technologies. Well, thanks, stupid. Like, I can't do that. I'm going to get fired, right?
Yeah, it's like tenure. You stop using your phone.
Yeah, exactly. for thee, but not for me. And so that advice just didn't, why would we, right? These tools are fantastic. Why would we stop using them? So I wanted to find a healthy approach to using these tools. And the answer to how we do that turned out to be much more interesting and much more liberating than stop using your phone. Phones are evil. That's stupid. That's not good advice, and it doesn't work. And so I wanted to find a better approach, and so I went deeper into the psychology. And then here's what happened next. I figured out how to do it. I became Indistractable. I spent 5 years. There's 30 pages of citations to peer-reviewed studies in Indistractable. I handed people the answer on a silver platter. Here, we complain about how distraction is so awful, so terrible. Here is the answer. And it changed my life. I can't tell you. I mean, I'm in the best shape of my life at 48 years old. I have a better relationship with my family than ever before. I'm more productive than ever before. This stuff really, really works. Anybody can do it. But here's what happened. I had these phone calls. I do these office hours every week where anybody can call me and for 15 minutes, they can talk about whatever they want, right? So whatever question you might have from reading one of my books, happy to answer any questions. And maybe like 1 out of 20 calls or so, somebody would call and the call would sound like this. They'd say, hey, Nir, I read Indistractable. It was a great book, but it didn't work. So I said, oh, wow, tell me, I spent 5 years writing it. I poured my heart in it. I did a ton of research. Like, tell me what didn't work. Let's start with step 1. How did step 1 go? Well, Nir, I didn't do step 1. I didn't do that one. Okay, no problem. I understand. No problem. Step 2. How did step 2 go? Tell me all about that. I read step 2. I read it. I just didn't do it. And so here I was thinking, these people were waiting for months to get on a call to ask me how to do the thing that was in the very book that they read and just didn't do. And so I thought, what's wrong here? Like, did I screw up as an author?
Sort of disheartening as an author.
It's very disheartening, and I'm guessing you probably experienced it as well, Shane. Like with your books, it hurts. And yet I thought to myself, wait a minute, I do this to authors all the time. Like I've got a bookshelf full of books with great advice. I've talked to coaches and consultants and not done what they've told me to do. What's going on? Why is it that when we know what to do, and we want the benefits of those behaviors, we still don't do it? Right? We all know how to get in shape. We all know how to, build a business. You got to do the hard things. We know how to have a healthy relationship with our family. We have to be fully present with them. We basically know what to do. And if you don't know what to do, ask Google, ask ChatGPT. The answers are all there. What I tried to figure out is why. Why is it that despite knowing what to do, we don't do it? And so what I realized was that there was a missing link. And that missing link was that we can know what to do. We can know the behavior. We can know the benefits of that behavior. But we're missing something. We're missing the belief. And so this is what I call the motivation triangle, where the two sides are held up, essentially, benefits and behavior, by belief. Case in point, if I don't believe that I will get the benefit, right? Let's say I have a job that pays me X amount of salary and my boss tells me I'm going to get a promotion, I'm going to get a bonus, but I don't trust that boss, right? Maybe I don't think the company's going to do that well. Maybe I don't trust the benefit's going to come. Guess what? I'm not going to work that hard because I don't believe that the benefit will come. Or what's much more common is the other side of the triangle. I don't believe in the behavior. I don't believe in my own ability. I have what's called a limiting belief around my own ability to do that behavior. I'm not really sure if I'm going to stick with the exercise. Maybe I'll fail at my business. Maybe that book won't work out. And so we tell ourselves these stories, these limiting beliefs that keep us from doing the thing we know how to do and what to do. And so that's what Beyond Belief is all about. It delves into how do we recognize those limiting beliefs and turn them into liberating beliefs.
So a couple episodes ago, we had a guest on the podcast who is one of the preeminent researchers on the psychology of trust. And something you just said reminded me of something that he said. He basically gave this example of how we undermine our own trust in other people by starting to tell ourselves stories about what's going on. So he used the example of, I've assigned some research to a lab assistant because I have a thing on Tuesday. I pick them because I trust them. And then, they go off for the weekend and they're going to do this and I believe it. And then I check social media and I see that they're on vacation. And so now I go find another person to do the work for me because I no longer trust that they're going to do it just because I have some more information. And it strikes me that what you're talking about is it maps to this kind of idea that, his point was this person who I already decided was capable, who knows? They probably would have done it. They've always pulled through before. I had reasons to trust them. Just because I snooped on their social media doesn't mean that I shouldn't trust them anymore. And yet my brain goes crazy and I undermine my own faith in them. It strikes me that this connects to what you're talking about, that there's lots of ways that we don't realize that we undermine our own goals based on the story that we tell ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. It's all about these stories. It's all about these lenses. And the sinister part is that we don't realize we have these hidden limiting beliefs. We just kind of operate day to day, not realizing what I call these three powers of belief. The three powers of belief is that our beliefs change what we see, what we feel, and what we do. It's attention, anticipation, and agency. And we can say it, but to people, we don't understand. People, it's shocked me how profoundly our beliefs will affect what we see, feel, and do. For just a few examples, people who are on a diet see food as physically bigger. People who are afraid of heights see distances as farther. They will measure them as farther than people who are not. People who, if you think about our relationships, we don't see people accurately as they really are. We see people through the beliefs that we have about them. That's what we see about people. And we reinforce those constantly. Joe at work is such a jerk. I don't like that guy. And so what do? We don't look for the positives based on our filters, based on our beliefs. We look for all the times they screw up. So we become hypersensitive based on our beliefs to reinforce what we think we already know. And if we don't recognize those beliefs, we underperform, we live life full of regret, and we don't live out our full potential.
So this seems to me a lot like narrative, right? Like the stories that we tell ourselves in our head about ourselves and about the people around us. So if I say, going back to Shane's example, like tell this story about, this person isn't going to get the job done. Or I tell this story about myself, right? If I jump off this, high rock cliff into a beautiful pool of water, I'm going to get hurt, right? Because I have this fear of heights. Or if this diet is going to be really hard and I'm not the type of person who can lose weight and accomplish this. Like, is there that degree of like narrative in our head that's going into this belief or lack of belief, or are there other dynamics at play?
There's certainly part of it, but I think that's a subset of the power of beliefs. For example, the second chapter of the book opens with a story of a gentleman by the name of Daniel Gisler. And Daniel is a very right-brain guy. He was a commodities trader, very numbers-based. And in his 50s, he has an accident and he has to have ankle surgery. And he gets these pins put in his leg to heal. And then several years later, it's time for those pins to be removed from his leg. When this procedure, he knows it's coming up, and he stumbles somehow on a YouTube video on the power of hypnosis. And he goes down this rabbit hole studying what's called hypnosedation. And it sounds like a weird woo-woo thing. It turns out thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, I should say, have had surgery without anesthesia through hypnosedation. So he takes an online course, then he takes a live course. He gets really deep into this field of hypnosedation. And Daniel goes through an hour-long procedure where metal is ripped from bone with zero anesthesia. Not general anesthesia, not topical anesthesia. I didn't believe it until I actually saw the video. I've seen dozens of videos of people going under surgery with hypnosedation. It doesn't make any sense, and yet it works. Now, that is not mindset. That is not storytelling. That is the power of beliefs. What is that power of belief? That's the power of attention. So what Daniel's able to do, and hypnosedation is not like stage hypnosis, right? Stage hypnosis is a show. That's through the power of suggestion. And people think it's about controlling others. In fact, hypnosedation is when you're controlling yourself. And so what Daniel's able to do is focus his attention so narrowly. And how does this work? We know that the human brain processes, or takes in 11 million bits of information per second, 11 million bits. That's about 2 War and Pieces per second of information. But we only process 50 bits of information through conscious attention. 50 versus 11 million. And I can prove it to you right now. If you think about right now, there's all kinds of things happening in the room you're in. So if you listen to the sound of my voice and you focus on what I'm saying, but I want you at the same time to listen to the hum of the room you're in, or the traffic outside, or focus on your breathing. You can't do it. You can't pay attention to all these things at the same time. So what your brain has to do is to switch between this focus of attention on different things. So it's almost like one of those security systems that cycles through cameras, right? That's what your brain is doing. And so it's what we're living life through is this tiny, tiny keyhole of attention. We're only paying attention to a tiny bit of information at a time because that's all our brains can process. So how does the brain filter down 11 million bits to 50 bits? It's through our beliefs. It's solely through our beliefs. And so what Daniel Gisler and tens of thousands of other people who have done hypnosedation have done is that they are able to hyper focus on one particular source of information, this image they're making in their head. That's kind of how they do it. And that is to the exclusion of everything else. And so why do I tell this story? I'm not advocating for hypnosedation. I'm not going to do it. But what I wanted to show people is, my God, if you can use the power of your beliefs to filter out the pain of a scalpel cutting through your skin down to the bone and not feel that pain. And you can see it on the video. His vital signs are totally stable. If we can do that, what else can we do? What other problems, what other pain points? You know, I like to say that everything worth having in life is on the other side of discomfort, right? You want to have a great family? It's going to take work. You want to have a great business? It's going to take work. You want to have a great podcast? It's hard work. Everything's on the other side of discomfort. So the book is really about how can we use the power of beliefs to manage that pain, to manage that discomfort. If Daniel could do it during surgery, what else can we do with that power?
We do have a great surprise for everyone that Shane is going to undergo surgery with hypnosedation live on the show right now.
At the
Here we
end
go.
of
All
this-
right, Shane.
Turn to your left.
What are we doing today? Colonoscopy? What's up?
There's so much to this. So I have over the last 6 months I've developed tinnitus, which is horrible. I don't recommend it for anyone. And there's lots of reasons why people get tinnitus, and it's being studied, or tinnitus, I guess is how it's pronounced. I've been listening to all sorts of stuff about it. So I can attest that there's something to this. What you put your attention on and what you believe is happening enhances the tinnitus. If you focus on something else, the gain in your ears/brain can turn down. And if you focus on it, it feeds it and it turns it right up. And I hate it. I would say that I'm more open to, because, spoiler, I've been reading Beyond Belief and I know Nir's work so I dig this stuff, but just hearing the pitch, I would say what you had just said without explaining the science, which I think is the very fascinating part about this, I would be much more skeptical and less open to this idea that what we believe can affect our physical sensations. But now, after experiencing tinnitus, I'm like, I experience that every day. So being able to turn it off is my question. Like, how do I get the Navy SEAL training to put my attention to not feel cold and whatever, and then never hear this sound in my ears again?
Yeah.
I don't know if I haven't got to that part of the book yet, but
Yeah. So you will love the chapter that focuses on chronic pain, because tinnitus has a lot in common with chronic pain, where it's chronic pain is defined as pain that's still there after 6 months, and there's no detectable physical ailment. And it turns out that chronic pain is really a disease of rumination. Before I start, by the way, on this, I'm not saying that any sort of pain isn't real. I want to be loud and clear. All pain is real. No one is faking it. No one is making it up. All pain is real, but suffering is optional. A lot of the things that we suffer from, there are a lot of interests. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I'm just telling you the economics are such that nobody has an incentive to tell you about the science of how you can cure yourself. And it's not through anything woo-woo. I'm very science-based. I don't believe in any of the chakras and quantum mumbo-jumbo that some people...
You're like the opposite of that guy.
I'm the opposite of that. But I came across what's called pain reprocessing therapy. And this is a very well-studied technique that essentially realizes the brain enters into this fear-pain loop. And so what pain reprocessing theorizes is that when we have some kind of damage, maybe it starts with some kind of physical harm, right? We become very acute. Our body remembers that and becomes very attuned to looking at the precursors of what incited that pain. And so what typically, I struggled with back pain for decades. And the conventional advice was, when you feel back pain, lay down, don't move, don't agitate, rest, ice it, heat it, do everything you can to not feel the pain. And so what we do is we become hyper fixated on stopping the pain, because pain is dangerous. Pain is not dangerous. Pain is not dangerous. Pain is a signal. Pain is information, just like the other 11 million bits of information we're getting. So what causes chronic pain, we think, and many other ailments, including tinnitus, possibly, is that we establish this fear of, I have this signal coming in. I think it's dangerous. I'm scared of it. How long will it last? Will it go away? Is it going to get worse? Am I going to do this for my whole life? What kind of terrible procedures might I need to make it go away? I get so scared by that the fear itself is so uncomfortable that it becomes associated with that signal. And now we're in this terrible loop. And it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse, until we're essentially dialing up that attention, that keyhole of attention, only on something itsy bitsy, just this one signal. It's all we can think about. It becomes overwhelming. And just to reiterate once again, it's not something anyone is making up. It's not fake. It's not just in your head, even though it is all in your brain. That all pain is in your brain, right? Pain is not here. Pain is not here. Pain is not here. All pain is processed in the brain. And so what pain reprocessing therapy does is it teaches the brain to chill out. It teaches the brain that pain is a signal. And this works incredibly well. We know, when you go to the chiropractor or you go to the doctor and he shows you a scan of your back. If you go to get an X-ray of your back, if you're of a certain age, our age, they're going to find something. 100% chance on that scan of your spine, they're going to find, oh, you have a slip disc, you have a this, you have a this. They're going to find something, because lots of people do. Almost everybody does. But there is no correlation between the people who have a slip disc or something funny in their spine on an X-ray and pain. There's no correlation, because even if there is damage, the brain does an amazing job of tuning out that discomfort. Think about it from a historical perspective. Think about our caveman ancestors. You know how many spurs and thorns and infections and diseases they had that they were carrying around? They weren't in chronic pain all the time. They would die. They survived because their brains learned over time, okay, that's not a threat. Turn down the pain meter. Turn down the recognition, the amount we pay attention to that signal. And so that's what pain reprocessing therapy does. It realizes there's nothing to be scared of. Pain is not damage. Pain is a signal. And so over time, you can learn to turn it down.
So I have a friend who he has told me about this. I was complaining that I'd hurt my back, and he told me about how. So I'm passing on third hand here, but how people used to get lots of ulcers. Like in the 1950s, everyone had ulcers. People were stressed out, and now since like the 90s, people who are stressed out get back pain. And he was telling me about how this is a function of of what our brains are doing when we're stressed out and where we sort of our brains and bodies decide to put the pain. And I was like, bullshit, when he told me that.
Everybody says
And
bullshit. I said bullshit too. Absolutely.
but I love the science. It's so easy to dismiss stuff like this by saying this is the same as like wishing for in the stars for like a free helicopter or whatever, that like your pain will go away. But I'm curious for you as someone who is skeptical of as sort of a default stance on many things, sort of
That's me.
academically. Someone who looks for the contrarian thing, as someone who has, as Joe just described, has written about multiple sides of things in ways that I think as a person who's more sort of linear of a thinker would do. How did you possibly get on board with this exploration that belief can be a scientifically sort of supportable thing? Like, how did you even get past the speed bump of skepticism?
Well, I need a lot of evidence for one, and I think in the book I describe the difference between a fact. A fact is truth that is objectively true, whether you believe it or not. Right? The world is more like a sphere than it is flat. Doesn't care if you believe it or not. It's an objective fact. That's facts. On the other end of the spectrum is faith. Faith is a conviction that does not require evidence. There is no amount of evidence I can give you to persuade you that God benefits those who are good. How do I give you evidence? That's purely faith. Either you have faith in that or you don't. A belief is something in the middle. Between fact and faith is a belief. A belief is a strongly held conviction open to new evidence. And I think a lot of the problems that we have in the world today come from the fact that people think that the things that they hold dear, they think are facts or faith, when really they're beliefs, or at least they should be beliefs. That when we allow ourselves to be open to new evidence, we can still have those strongly held convictions, but allowing ourselves to be open to new evidence is the key. And I think especially in an age of so much disruption, of so much change that we're going through right now between AI and the economy and war and strife and all the stuff that's happening in the world, the most important skill is to be able to change your perspective, because that's what makes us adaptable. We know that actually adaptability is the number one trait for mental stability and well-being. It's being able to be adaptable. And so being adaptable is exactly what this show is all about. It's being able to zag, which is incredibly uncomfortable. We hate taking someone else's position. Hate it, right? Like a big part of the book, there's only one chapter on chronic pain or pain in general, but a big part of the book is about relationships. And part of this chapter that I talk about relationships, I talk about the relationship I have with my mother and how, I'll tell you this very quick anecdote. A few years ago, my mom had her birthday and I was in Singapore. She was in Orlando, Florida, where I grew up. And it was a real pain trying to figure out how can I get flowers to her on her birthday from Singapore. And so I stayed up late so that I could call Eastern time and, figure out this florist, that florist. And I did shopping online to figure out who has the best stuff. But, they don't really show you what they really will deliver. Anyway, I spent a lot of time trying to buy her flowers. She gets the flowers on her birthday. I call her up and I say, "Hey, Mom, how are the flowers?" And she says, "Thank you for the flowers, but you may want to call the florist because the flowers didn't look so good." Yeah, right. How would you react, guys? Just curious, how would you react?
I mean, it depends on if this is like what always happens. If this is a pattern, I'd be like, I knew it. And, if it's not a pattern, I think I would try to, I don't know, I'd try to like talk her / me into the idea that, that the thought is worth it or whatever.
Okay.
It's disappointing though. I mean, it's
disappointing. Nice. Joe, what do you think? What's your first reaction?
So this seems like an archetype of a Jewish mother that I'm familiar with. Generally, not mine actually, but like Jewish mothers of girls that I've dated, friends I've known, etc. So I definitely would go to creating a certain narrative like, she always does this. Like, I went through all this trouble to get these flowers and she can't appreciate it. Like, why even say that to me? Like, what is the benefit that's going to happen? To just know that the flowers, they come out that great? That's that's great. I didn't pick the freaking flowers. Like, it's not my fault. I would just spiral. I would just Jewish anxiety spiral here, as I am right now. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm pretty sure my aura ring is saying my heart rate is going up. Yeah.
Exactly. So I was transported from my mature middle-aged self into my 15-year-old brain and instantly said what I later regretted, which was, well, why did I even bother? Because I was operating from a belief that my mother is too hard to please. And that belief was coloring everything you said. Just like you said, Shane, well, if it was a pattern, if I'd seen it before, if this is what she always does, once again, she's so judgmental. And so I was coloring it based on my past beliefs. Again, we don't see people as they are. We see them as we believe they are. Or more importantly, actually more accurately, as we are. Because the truth was, when I later analyzed that situation, and I take you in through this chapter in the book, I talk about exactly how I got to this state. But what I realized was that she was just saying a statement of fact. The fact was, something about the flowers wasn't great. It's just a statement of fact. Now, I interpreted that through my lens of belief that she's too hard to please. But in reality, I was too hard to please. Because I wanted her to thank me in exactly the way I would prefer to be thanked.
Because of all the effort you made.
Exactly.
You stayed up late to Eastern time.
I had a belief that what she was saying, that her disappointment meant that she wasn't disappointed in the florist, that she was disappointed in me, that I had messed up, that I had done a bad job, that I'm not a good enough son. These are all beliefs, right? And they weren't serving me. And the key point of the book, the reason the book exists, is to help people realize, as I had to realize through 5 years of writing this book, was that beliefs are tools, not truths, which means that we can believe whatever we want based on evidence, based on the ability to change it based on evidence, to pick and choose the beliefs that serve us rather than hurt us. And so many of the beliefs that we hold on to because we think they're facts. But very few of our beliefs are actually based on facts, right? Most of life is not that certainty of this is definitely the way the world is. Did I marry the right person? Did I start the right business? Is this the right project? Did I say the right thing? These are all beliefs. They're not facts. And so that messy gray area of beliefs turns out to be what we really need to think about in order to make sure we can be our best selves and live our best life.
So what are the kind of practical ways to get there, right? Because I think any of us who have been to therapy, and we've all probably been to therapy, right, have gotten to this place of like, yeah, like Shane and I have even been to the same therapist before.
Yeah.
But we get to this point of, okay, I know it is this grounding belief that I have, this way that I interpret this interaction with my mother, my partner, my friends, etc., that's holding me back. But then taking that leap from acknowledging that is there,
yeah,
to actually fixing and changing that in a real concrete way feels like a canyon. So what comes next? Like once you sort of understand this idea, like how do you actually change it?
Well, I appreciate that question because I read a lot of books and I can't stand the books that I read that just say nice fluffy stories with no practical tips. And so all my books have a section at the end of every chapter that tells you, what do I do? It's very important to be super practical. I think what we don't do is a lot of what therapy tells us to do. A lot of therapy tells us to navel gaze, tells us to feel our feelings, tells us to get in touch with our past lives and our trauma and all this, and identify all the things that people have done to us that may have caused us to be the way we are. That's not all therapy. It's a lot of bad therapy. And it turns out it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I've looked at the studies. It turns out that most talk therapy is no better than a placebo. That really the benefit that we're getting from a lot of talk therapy, and I wrote a whole paper on this, I can share it with you, is really turns out to be something that we're getting from having a conversation with another person and looking at our beliefs. And then at the end of a very long process, going through a lot of unnecessary steps, like who do I blame for why I'm dysfunctional? We end up with, hey, how can we choose a better perspective? If the therapy is good, that's what they'll end with is, okay, well, what will we do differently? After hours and hours and hours of talking about how everyone has hurt me. The most effective technique, it turns out, is called a cognitive reappraisal, where what we're doing is exactly what this podcast is all about. It's about taking our current perspective, that we are dead set, that is the way things happened, period, and realizing that we are fallible. Our memory is incredibly fallible, that a lot of what we think happened absolutely did not happen. We have colored it in retrospect based on our beliefs, and then looked for evidence every single day around why our false beliefs are actually the truth. A much better perspective is to say, and this comes from the work of Byron Katie, who I'm a big fan of, who actually got her technique from thousands of years of this pedagogy all the way back to Aristotle, which is asking us to simply take that perspective and look at it from a different point of view. How do I zag? How do I look at it from a different perspective? So, for example, the work of Byron Katie, I'm a particular fan of, and that's how I got through this situation with my mother, and it's improved my relationship with my daughter, with my wife, with my business colleagues. It's changed my life. It essentially asks us, the first and most important question is, to after we state our belief, my mom is too judgmental, and asks us to pose to ourselves the very first question, which is this true? Of course it's true. Didn't I just tell you? You both would have reacted exactly like I reacted. My mom was being judgmental. She's in the wrong. But then there's a second question. Is it absolutely true? My mother is judgmental. By the way, substitute anything or anyone that you might be struggling with, a belief that you think is definitely a fact. Okay? My mother is too judgmental. Is it absolutely true? Well, maybe not. Like, is there 1% chance that it might not be true? Maybe she's not being judgmental. I mean, is there any way that could be true? Of course there is. The third question, who am I with that belief? Well, I become a 15-year-old prick. I become, I say things I later regret. And then finally, the fourth question is, who would I be without that belief? And then you realize, wait a minute, I don't need this belief. It's not serving me. And so those are just that. This is the Byron Katie technique called the work, which she deserves the credit for. But I talk about how I use this in the book. And then what she does later is to ask you to do a turnaround. A turnaround is when what we talked about earlier, where we turn around to different people. And there's the turnaround to the self, which is where instead of my mom is judgmental, I am judgmental. Could that possibly be true? By the way, it doesn't have to be true. Many people say, whoa, that's hocus pocus, right? That's not true. I'm making it up. It doesn't have to be true, right? A belief does not have to necessarily be true for it to be useful. So what I found is that I gain much greater peace when I'm able to take that alternative perspective and just see a portfolio of perspectives. Maybe one of them is true, one of them is not. Doesn't really matter. I can choose. Because remember, love is measured by the benefit of the doubt. Love is measured by the benefit of the doubt. That's my personal definition of love. That the more benefit of the doubt that we give someone, the more we love them. So that jerk who cuts you off in traffic, you don't love at all. You give them no benefit of the doubt. They could be running to the hospital because they have a dying parent in the hospital. No, they're trying to be a jerk to me. They're personally trying to be a jerk on the highway. Whereas, when my daughter was born, babies are a lot of work. They cry all the time. They poop. They do all this stuff that demands a lot of our attention. But we give them so much grace. We give them so much grace because what else can a baby do other than cry to get what it needs? So love is measured by the benefit of the doubt. When my daughter was born, anything she wanted, of course, she's a baby. What would we possibly expect from a baby? Well, guess what? We're all babies. We're just big babies. And so love is measured by the benefit of the doubt when we can start seeing people as simply operating with the toolkit that they have. They're doing their best. Everybody just has a toolkit of beliefs that they are doing their best through. And so what we want to do is to offer them a lot of grace by using the perspective, by using the belief that really serves us and helps us be our best with them. And so these are just a few of the very practical techniques we can use.
This hits for me so hard because I was actually thinking about this the other day. So Shay and I both have 3-year-olds, right? And no one can be quite as big of an asshole as a 3-year-old sometimes, so right?
Oh my God, they are the biggest jerks.
they're just like, I don't want you. It's like, just straight up. And I was thinking the other day, I was like, if my wife said half the things that my toddler says, I would be really hurt, right? If she was just like, go away. I don't want you. Get out of here. I want to be left alone. But because he's my, adorable 3-year-old toddler, I'm like, I have no reaction to it, right? I'm like, all right, buddy. Yeah, I'll come back in a little bit. Mm-hmm. Or, it's like he asked for pizza all night, that you give him pizza. He's like, no, I don't want this. If a person you're taking out to dinner or had over your house for dinner said that, you'd be like, this is the biggest jerk in the world with a toddler. Right. I'm like, all right, what do you want? Microwave hot dog? Let's go. Let's do it. So it essentially sounds like what you're saying is I have to tap into whatever foundational benefit of the doubt belief I have about my toddler, who's a little adorable asshole, and apply that to everyone else in my life.
That's part of it. And what we do, the knee-jerk reaction, is called the fundamental attribution error. That when other people are behaving a certain way, we always think it's their fault. They're doing it on purpose, right? Even with children, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I have a 17-year-old girl that I'm very close friends with now. You know, raising her, there were many times where I was definitely sure that she was doing something to piss me off. That wasn't there. Almost never.
Your attribution.
What's that?
Yeah, your attribution is what's causing that.
We always think it's about us. We always think, okay, that person is doing it to annoy me. As we give people less and less benefit of the doubt, it becomes more and more about us. That it's, you know, we become the center of our universe, and it's not helpful. In the vast majority. Now, it doesn't mean you have to always put yourself in that situation. There's absolutely, you know, if someone is doing something that you don't like, there's no law that says you have to be with them all the time. But there also is a way to change our perspective, to change our beliefs, to allow us to cope in that situation in a much healthier way. And so when I learned this methodology and I started applying it to my daughter, I completely changed how we interacted. I completely changed our relationship. And we're really, really close friends now because I constantly remind myself, is this belief serving me? You know, what underlying beliefs do I have that I don't even recognize that I'm operating under? And so just taking that pause and analyzing that belief and then asking myself, who am I becoming when I have that belief? And who would I be without that belief? Now I can choose. I can take a completely different perspective. Many times I take a perspective that is completely opposite to what I originally thought. The complete total opposite. And sometimes, you know what? That works much, much better than my default belief.
So there's something that you said earlier, you kind of mentioned a couple times about, you know, a belief isn't necessarily a fact. You may not know what the fact is, and so you believe it. It's not faith in the sense that there's no way to prove it. But what about a placebo that you know is a placebo?
Yeah.
What about a belief that serves you, but you're pretty sure it's not true or it's not a fact?
Yeah.
How does that play into this psychology?
What a great question. Because of course, if you know that a placebo is a placebo, it wouldn't work, right? No.
Would it?
No, it turns out, and this is the work of Ted Kaptchuk at Harvard. Ted Kaptchuk did this amazing study, and it's been replicated many times at other institutions, where he gave people suffering from IBS a placebo, and he told them, this is a placebo. It said in big, bold letters on the pill bottle, placebo. And he told them this is an inert substance that some people have found helps them cope with the symptoms of IBS. He ran this study. Turns out the placebos were just as effective as most of the conventional treatments. And in fact, after the study, people came up to him, called him up and say, hey, Dr. Kaptchuk, can I please get some more of those placebo pills? Because they were so effective at helping me manage my IBS. This is called an honest placebo. And in fact, did you know that the placebo effect is getting stronger? That, you know, whenever there's a new medication, the pharmaceutical companies have to prove that drug is not just effective, they have to prove it's more efficacious than a placebo, right? It has to be better than a placebo, right? The problem is that companies have to spend more and more money developing these drugs because the placebo effect keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger over time since the 1950s.
Culturally, or
why?
just...
Yeah, it's a big mystery. Why would that be? Turns out, remember, the three powers of belief are attention, anticipation, and agency. That second one, anticipation. More people are hearing that placebo effects are real and effective, and so it becomes stronger the more they hear it. And so
I love this.
This is exactly the whole point of the book, that beliefs are tools, not truths. Is it true that a placebo will actually heal you? No, placebos don't heal anyone, right? The placebos don't cure cancer. Placebos don't heal broken bones. That is not how placebos work. But it is true that placebos will change your perception of discomfort, of pain. So they're amazing for IBS, insomnia, ADHD, anxiety. Placebos are incredibly effective. So we can know that there's nothing in this substance, still take it, and it'll still have an effect, which is why, you know, I used to be, again, Shane has known me for years and years. I'm very skeptical. And so one of the things I'm super skeptical about is any kind of alternative medicine. You know, my wife's family is Chinese, and my father-in-law is super into traditional Chinese medicine. And I always made fun of it. It's so silly. None of it works. If it works, the pharmaceutical companies would have known about it a long time ago. I've changed my tune because I now know about how powerful placebos are. And so if it doesn't cost that much money and it doesn't have any dangerous things about it, use it. Why not? It costs a few bucks and it really does cure these symptoms. Again, it doesn't heal. it changes your perception of the symptoms. And that is a lot. All right. That's fantastic.
It's an enormously important distinction, but so much of our suffering is about our perception, right?
That's
so
right. In fact, 80%, studies have found that 80% of healthcare spending in the United States is about the symptoms of discomfort. 80%. It's not actually curing the sickness. It's about handling all the symptoms that come, the uncomfortable symptoms that come with the sickness.
Okay, so I have something that I want to ask you because it's from your work before Beyond Belief. I'm pretty sure it connects to your new work, and I know that it connects to what's going on culturally and sort of economically right now with people. I keep coming back to the thing that you taught in Indistractable, which I actually, at one point, you were very kind. You may remember this. I wrote about this, not remembering that I got it from you. And you were super kind about how, like, hey, you got this from my book, right? And then I went back and edited the post to give you credit. But there's this I Love Lucy sketch that's famous, where she's on a conveyor belt. She's working on a conveyor belt, trying to, wrap the chocolate, something like that. And the conveyor belt starts going faster and faster and faster, and it's comedic. She starts eating them. She starts freaking out. She has no control over how fast the conveyor belt goes. I keep coming back to that analogy over and over again as I see AI is coming out faster and faster. CEOs are proclaiming, if you don't use AI, you're fired. New stuff is happening every day. And like you read, the news and you're like, what crazy thing that just got turned upside down, in like the world or the country or the economy. It feels like a lot of people are feeling that conveyor belt out of control feeling. And you what you write about is how there's this special sort of hell, which is you have no control over what happens, and yet you are subject to the consequences.
Right.
Employees nowadays, people nowadays who are feeling like they have no control over what's going on in the world that's affecting their jobs or their lives or the community they live in, and are feeling this, what does your new work say to people who believe that they're in that kind of situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the scene from I Love Lucy, this is from the 1960s, I guess, 50s, 60s, that classic scene where she's working in a chocolate factory, and she gets this job where she has to wrap these chocolates as they come down the conveyor belt, and she does such a good job that this manager lady comes out and she sees, oh, you're doing such a good job. Okay, crank it up. And she yells for the factory to crank up the speed of the conveyor belt. And now the chocolates are coming out super, super fast. And Lucy has to like wrap them up, and she can't keep up. So she puts them in her hand, she puts them in her mouth, and it's hilarious on TV. Not so funny in real life. Because, we've all seen this happen, right? That it's a pie eating contest, and first place is more pie. And that's the reality of work. And so the science of this, and this is what we're seeing in the workplace, is that we know the recipe for burnout. The recipe for burnout is the confluence of two things. This was a study by Stansfield and Candy at Oxford, I think it was, where they showed that the confluence of high expectations coupled with low control. That is literally the recipe for burnout. High expectations with low control. Interestingly, high expectations with high control, no problem. People rise to the occasion. But high expectations with low control, that's where people burn out. That's where we see people have higher rates of anxiety and depression. That is not a good place to be. So interestingly, it doesn't matter the job you do. You would think like, oh, the jobs that lead to anxiety and depression are sad jobs. Being a veterinarian who has to put cute animals to sleep, or, working in a hospice center. Nothing to do with the work you do. It's all about the culture and the environment you do it in, of high expectations with low control. So the antidote to that, and this is per what I've been working on with Beyond Belief, is how do we increase that sense of control? I call it agency. And so what we have to do is to learn how to live agentic lives. How do we become high agency leaders? And to become a high agency leader means we have to be able to understand what things we can control and what we can't control. And this is a really difficult, it sounds simple, right? We've all heard that we should, give me the grace to control the things I can and leave the things that we can't, that serenity prayer that I just butchered, but we've all heard it before. But what's interesting, I think that some of the new data that's come out is that when we give people advice to have what's called an internal locus of control, and locus of control is kind of where you think your point of leverage is. Are things happening to you, an external locus of control, Or do you have agency in the world, an internal locus of control? Can you change things? What's interesting, we've known for a long, long time that people who have an internal locus of control do better, and that in almost all aspects of life, they make more money, they have more friends, they contribute to their community more. Having internal locus of control is always a healthier perspective to have. In most cases, that in fact with other people, if you have an internal locus of control, if that's your entire belief worldview, you tend to be kind of a jerk to others. Because again, that fundamental attribution error, I should say, that you think, well, I got my stuff together, I can do things. Well, if they're not doing it, it's because they're incompetent. So with others, we want to give them the grace that they must have outside circumstances. There must be something happening in their life. Give them the grace of an external locus of control. But with ourselves, we want to have an internal locus of control. What's also pretty fascinating is that even when the cards are stacked against you, even in situations where socioeconomically you're discriminated against, you're oppressed, things are bad for you, you are a victim and have every reason to think so, it still benefits you to have an internal locus of control. You're still better off, even when you're in the worst circumstances. The people who keep an internal locus of control and believe that they can do something about their situation end up doing better. So that sense of agency is incredibly important. Now, unfortunately, the more we focus our keyhole of attention on what the news tells us to pay attention to, the more we get in trouble. Because what the news is telling us every day is that the world sucks, that things are terrible, environmental collapse, AI is taking our jobs, there's war and famine everywhere. And this is not true. It's a keyhole within a keyhole. Right? Your brain can only process 50 bits of information. And if those 50 bits of information are tuned into all the terrible things that are happening in the world, because the first rule of journalism, if it bleeds, it leads, right? They want to show you all these conflicts that have nothing to do with you, but they make you think that that's all you should pay attention to. Well, that becomes your life. And you become less agentic because you think, I can't do anything about these conflicts. I can't, and yet I feel like I constantly have to watch. And so a big part of being an agentic person is being very careful about what kind of information you let into your mind, what you allow yourself to consume, and then focus as much as you possibly can on the things you can actually control. Your family, your community, your colleagues. How can you improve the lives of those around you? And that's the way to improve your own life as well.
So to clarify, when you're saying in that situation, right, these things aren't true, you mean less like the actual individual news stories and more the general tilt of things are going terrible, things are worse than they've ever been?
Right. Well, many times what we actually see in the news, we've discovered the past several years, is just flat out not true. We've seen, a lot of things just turn out to be.
You watch two channels and they're very different.
Right. Yep. That's exactly right. Yeah. You know, thing. Yeah, right. There was a wonderful study, I think it was at Yale, where they had people watch a football game and a ref's call of a controversial play. Of course, you know what I'm going to say. One team thought, "Oh my God, the ref is an idiot. That's a terrible call. Very clearly made the wrong call." And the other side said, "No, perfect call. That's exactly what happened." And so if that happens in football, it definitely happens in geopolitics, where, if I'm one side, well, then I see this same exact event one way and my opposition sees it a completely different way. And of course, the thing nobody talks about is that if you were born into a different family, into a different culture, a different religion, perhaps, you would see it completely differently, because these aren't facts. These are beliefs. And so when we have the intellectual humility to understand that that's what we're looking at, we're just looking at things through these lenses that we call beliefs, that's when everything changes. That's when we can actually have the intellectual humility to understand someone on the other side, as opposed to, enjoying our little bubble of certainty.
I know you're definitely speaking my language. There'll be so often I'm watching a Giants game and my dad will call me and I try and have a balanced take on calls, even though you can see it in your own head, right? Be like, was that pass interference? Was that not? And I'll try and take the neutral intellectual humility side on something with my dad and be like, that actually probably was a good call. And he's like, no, it wasn't. Refs suck. It's terrible. So,
yeah. We love that.
I've seen that very vividly.
And that's just football. Who cares, right? It's not that consequential. But, when it comes to our relationships.
We care.
Sorry. Very
we
important.
Care.
Yes, very important.
I'm with you, Nir, on that one. But no, you say the key word that I've been thinking this whole conversation, intellectual humility. I've been saying for years that that's the fancy way of saying The classic phrase, be open-minded, but not so open-minded your brains fall out, right? That,
Right.
This virtue in the middle of being willing to change in light of new information, in fact, seeking new information to know if you should change, and not being so gullible that you always change your mind. It's a hard balance to strike, but this
Right.
stuff that you're talking about, these tools of belief, it strikes me are like one of the things that I've thought about and written about and tried to learn over the last few years since getting onto this concept of intellectual humility is how do you build it? How do you actually develop it? And it's, it's easier said than done, but it strikes me that you're talking about some tools that can do that. And speaking of 3-year-olds, look who just joined
How's
us.
it going there, Quinn? Good to see you.
You want to hear? Can you hear?
What a
Yeah.
cutie. Look at that
Hey,
smile.
buddy.
Hey, Quentin. Hi.
There's Uncle Joe and there's Nir, who you haven't met in person
Thank
yet.
you. What's up, buddy?
I'm to see.
If you want to see, okay.
Aw.
Well, we're almost
Yeah.
done. Oh, and now there's a dog too. Okay,
Got the whole
Oh,
family
thank you.
here. What's up, Q?
I love it.
we're all here.
Hey,
We're all here now.
Fantastic.
Okay.
To answer your question, I think we fight for it. I think the answer is, unfortunately, only the people who have that certainty of faith that no evidence will change what I think. Those are the people who are the loudest. And I think what we need is that the overwhelming majority of people who are moderates, who understand that the thing to fight for is not your particular faith. That's where we get into trouble. What the thing to fight for is that we all have the space to hear each other and that we are open ourselves, but we lead by example by starting with ourselves, re-examining our own beliefs, then re-examining our beliefs that we have with our family and maybe our community, maybe our religion. That's how we change the world. We start as individuals. We become very open and make this a daily practice of constantly reassessing our beliefs to ask ourselves the simple question, is this belief serving me or am I serving the belief? Is it something I'm beholden to or is it something that benefits me? If we can do that, and it is a practice, it is absolutely a practice, we open up whole new worlds. There's so many things that I would never have done before I wrote this book. Like, for example, I pray. I never used to pray other than when I was very, very young. I used to pray when I was very young and then I stopped because I said, who am I talking to? And now I did the research on how incredibly beneficial prayer is. It's life-changing. Even if I don't have faith, it doesn't matter if I know for a fact, things happened in the Bible this way or that way. I stopped needing that. Because the fact is, it's a tool, that this belief is nothing more than a tool. And if the tool serves me, and it absolutely does, I do it.
That's awesome.
That's
absolutely
amazing.
awesome. So I think it's time to get to our final two closer questions. One of this you actually haven't seen before, but I think you'll be able to answer it on the fly. Sure. So who's someone that right now you're following or reading that you think really embodies this idea of the art of the zag, right? That when everyone's zigging, it pays to zag.
Yeah, I followed Tyler Cowan for years. I think he consistently will give an alternative perspective. I don't always agree, but I like the fact that he doesn't just repeat the narrative that everyone hears. So that'd be someone on the top of my list. Who do you guys like, by the way? I'm so curious. Who's at the top of your list?
You're on the show right now because when we were having this conversation of who do we think embodies this, you were someone who I brought up. So
thanks.
It's on my mind because you have the new book that's out. But I've appreciated, so we had this sort of authors circle, back when we were both living in New York that you invited me into. So Nir would host other authors, people who were working on books, and we'd get together, and sometimes we would just sit and type. And talk about, what we're working on and get together. And that group of people, I'd say there's something special about that kind of community building and just those moments in your life when you're surrounded by people who are doing great stuff and supporting you. But everyone in that group of people, I think, are examples of these kinds of thinkers. And I think it's a tribute to you that you gathered those people like Tim Urban, who writes Wait But Why. I met him through you. He's someone who looks at the world and examines it and explains it in ways that sort of get out of the assumptions that we all we're on the railroad tracks of life, and he manages to sort of step off of those railroad tracks and help us to explain things more. So I think For me, a lot of the people who I pay attention to, who are, sort of art of the zag type of folks, are authors and thinkers in the same kind of category as your work. So, yeah, thank you for introducing me to some of those yourself.
Of course. Well, you're definitely part of that club.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I think
thanks.
there's a little bit of a renaissance of this right now on Substack, actually, where I've discovered a lot of incredibly talented writers who are exploring really interesting ideas. And I think it's part of the model, right? Is that like without the constraints of traditional media or even traditional digital media, you can just write about things that you wouldn't have otherwise. And one writer that I'm honestly kind of blown away by is Kyla Scanlon. She is this Gen Z pop economist, and
Right.
I think that she has some incredibly interesting ideas and insights about that kind of sit at this intersection of culture and technology and the economy, and like you definitely could poke holes in some of it, right? Or approach some of her ideas with a degree of skepticism. But I think there is, one, she does a good job of backing up her arguments, but two, I think she's exploring angles that others aren't. And reading her stuff always really makes me think. And also to see someone who's kind of dual on TikTok and on Substack and Instagram Reels and able to reach this younger Gen Z audience with really interesting ideas is just a great kind of media role model in that way as well. So I think she's an example of someone that you find in there. It's also like Ted Gao, Max Reed. Like there's a lot of really interesting thinkers that I've been discovering in my new Substack addiction, because I don't really let myself use vertical video apps because I don't trust myself. That, I want to give a shout out to, that's like a belief. Yeah. Probably is a belief right there. Yeah, it definitely is that I am someone without the enough self-control.
Very cool.
Sorry,
Excellent.
I derailed you there. No, I think that it's when you look for this stuff, you see it, right? It's exactly your point from earlier that when you are looking for people who are going against the grain or going the other way when the whole world is going one way, the road less traveled, whatever metaphor you want to use, when you're looking for that, you start to see it.
Yeah.
And once you start to see it, you can start to incorporate that thinking or use that to shift your thinking, which I think, it sounds like is on theme with your life's work, what it has culminated in this book certainly, but all of your books.
Yeah. Definitely.
And then our final question, what's one counterintuitive or contrarian idea that you think everyone listening to this should consider?
Wow. Well, we've covered a lot of contrarian ideas. I mean, who didn't we offend during this episode?
It's always the goal, offend everyone.
I think one point that's worth reinforcing, I put it at the back of the book because I was afraid I would lose people if I talked about it too soon. But the chapter is titled "Your Labels Are Your Limits," and I think we will look back in a few decades and realize that we were living in the age of labels. We didn't realize how harmful it was to assign these labels. And the reason we do this, it's called the Rumpelstiltskin effect. That's really what it's called in psychology. The Rumpelstiltskin effect says that, like the story of Rumpelstiltskin, that when we name something, we feel like we have power over it. The story of Rumpelstiltskin, the princess whoever, like she guesses his name and that's how she conquers him. And so we love that. We freaking love it. We love to label ourselves. We love to label the others. We love to label our diagnoses. We love to make up all these, you look on TikTok and half of what you see on social media is about, here's why you have this illness of one kind or another. Whether it's really an illness doesn't matter, whether it's actually you've been actually properly prescribed, whether that prescription, the metrics that they use to prescribe you are any good. No, don't worry about any of that. We love the labels. And you think, okay, what's the big deal? It's very comforting. Now I can do something about the problem if I have a label. The problem is that your labels do become your limits. That in a very practical term, when I am thinking about, I'm having a senior moment. That's my ADHD acting up. That's my anxiety. What am I thinking about? What am I doing? Where's my keyhole of attention? Is it on fixing the thing? Is it on being better? No, it's on my limitation. And when that becomes your identity, you're screwed. because you can't think of anything else. Why would you? Well, I can't do anything about it. That's who I am. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have these diagnoses. Certainly they're practical. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving medical advice, but I've definitely seen, and I think anyone who has eyes open can see it, that there's no check and balance on these labels. No one's asking us, wait a minute, is this actually good for us that 25% of American boys have a diagnosis with ADHD? Is that actually true? Do 25% of US boys have ADHD? Or is there no check and balance to say when you go to a doctor, who's going to tell you you don't have a diagnosis? By the way, I proved this to myself. I went for an evaluation. Guess what, boys? I have ADHD. Because nobody goes for an evaluation and doesn't get it. You can just walk in. You can do it over an app. Everybody can have it if you want it. Because there's no comparison. Again, all I have is my keyhole of attention. And when I'm asked on a Likert scale, do you feel distracted? Sometimes, never, often, whatever. Yeah, I get distracted. And I answered 100% often. I didn't fake a thing. I 100% wanted them to not diagnose me. And I got a diagnosis. Because there's no check and balance on it. And so I think what we need to be very careful of is not being critical of these labels, because there is a very strong nocebo effect, right? We talked about placebo effect, which comes from the Latin "I will help." There's also a very strong nocebo effect, "I will hurt," by having these labels, because your labels do become your limits.
This is fascinating. I think there's so much wisdom in that. The Rumpelstiltskin thing, I recently read a book, had a line in it that the things that we name grow in power. And I've been chewing on this, that there's like Beetlejuice and Voldemort, and like if you say the name, like it suddenly grows in power. And I've been playing with in my head, how does that interplay with the labels? You label your feelings, and so that gives you a little bit of power over it. And there seems like there is some contradiction there, but I'm really compelled by what you're saying about the limiting factor of putting a label on something that nothing is confined to its label, whether the label is accurate or not. It's the map is not the territory, like that whole thing. So right. I find that perhaps the opposite is true, that the things we name do grow in power rather than give us power over them.
Right. And there's nuance here. I don't want to sound like an absolutist. I think there is a proper time and place, but I actually become more and more aware that we lack the check and balances, right? There's a wonderful quote. I can't remember who said it. Someone said that at some point or someday medical science will advance to the point where everybody has a sickness. Right. And it's true. It's true. I mean, even in the UK right now, I just saw a study that the majority of people in the UK are neurodivergent. How does that make sense? How can the majority be divergent? It's because there's no check and balances on these diagnoses. We give them out to everyone because the teachers have an incentive to give out these diagnoses. The school system has an incentive. The doctor has an incentive. The parent certainly has an incentive. The only person who doesn't have the incentive is the poor kid who gets the diagnosis and the drugs, who doesn't really have a say. And so, again, I'm not anti-diagnosis. I'm not anti-medication. Certainly, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving medical advice. But I think this will be one of the things we look back on in 50 years and say, what the hell were we doing?
Well, as one of the majority of Ashkenazi Jews with IBS, I'm really looking forward to applying Beyond Belief to try and get my stomach back in gear. Although I'm not sure it'll take me all the way to eating dairy again, but we can see, because I want to get my hands on these placebo pills, to be honest.
Yeah. They sound great.
But just to reiterate, just so you don't get in trouble, placebos don't heal. So if you're lactose intolerant, you will still be lactose intolerant.
We'll see about that. I'm ordering a pizza. We're doing it, baby.
Okay.
We're back. Let's go. Joe's Pizza, here I come. No, Nir, so excited for this book. So Beyond Belief is out on March 10th. That's right.
That's right.
Where can folks get the book, and where can they follow you?
Sure. So Beyond Belief is sold wherever you buy your books, and to follow along, and there's a lot of bonus content actually on my website, Nir and Far. Nir is spelled like my first name, Nir, and far.com. And if you order the book before publication date, and I think we might extend the offer a little bit for that week as well, there's a guide, a belief transformation journal. You talked about, Joe, very practical tips for how to do this. We actually will give for free everyone who buys the book. It's this entire workbook of over 100 pages of 30 days of daily exercises that can help you transform these limiting beliefs.
Incredible.
All right.
Well, we'll put that all in the show notes. Make sure everyone can get it. That's an amazing bonus offer. I got to steal something like that for my book that's coming out. Nir, thank you so much for being on. I'm sure we'll have you on again soon.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.